Hi and welcome to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. I hope you're having a beautiful day today, no matter what it is you're doing. For the free wire tutorial today, I'd like to share with you a super easy accessible ring design. Now I've made this using some 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire, which stands up really well. It's comfortable to wear, it's easy to create, doesn't take very much wire or very much of your time. So let's head down to the board and take a closer look at the project together. So here's the easy wire wiggle ring up close. I like to think it looks like a pair of swans. Let's take a look at that on the finger instead. Very, very comfortable. It's curved to fit over the curve of the finger. I really enjoy making these and they're really, really simple. So let's just pop this one over to the side so you can refer back to it, and let's have a quick talk about the materials we're going to need. Now I have around about 10 inches or so here of 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire. It's really important when working with harder wires or wider wires to just ensure that that is nice and smooth and warm and ready to work. In terms of tools, I'm going to be using my 6-step bail making pliers. I'm also going to be using my battered old ring mandrel, and either you can whack that with a chasing hammer, or if you have one, ring bending pliers. These are really, really old and decrepit and a little bit rusty, but they're very, very helpful to help achieve the curve to make the ring super comfortable. If you don't have either of those, we can still achieve the same project using your standard chain nose pliers, and you will need some good cutters too. So let's take a look at the beginning section of the project. Again, the warmer you get that wire to start, the better. 10 inches or so of 1.25mm 16 gauge wire, and we're going to start by folding that around the centre point of the wire at the point on your ring stick or mandrel that suits the size you wish to use. I might make a slightly smaller one. So 10 inches or so has made a good size P to Q in the UK. I think that's around about a size 8 in the United States, give or take. If you need a much larger ring, then you might like to add a little more wire. Now once I've got the size of the shank set, what I'm going to do is just continue pushing the wire over the surface. If I remove the mandrel, you'll see what I mean. I've just taken both of those wires slightly over the top, and this gives you an idea of how much curvature goes around the top of the ring itself. Now I'm going to be using my 6-step bail making pliers. Really, really useful tool to have. And every time I do a manoeuvre on one side, so I've got one side of the wire here, the other side over here, I'm going to repeat that on the opposite side. Now the idea of the design is that we've got 3 loops graduating down in sizes, and we're looking to create a series of basically pear shapes rather than round shapes. And I like the ring to sit centrally, so if you have an imaginary line it will be nice and symmetrical down there. So let's grab hold of the pliers with those 6 different bail making steps on them, and I think I'm going to start my design with step number 5, so the 5th largest, just one down from the largest size there. So I'm going to grip a hold of the wire that's coming away on the side closest to me and just rotate that back around part of the way. Let's take a look at that. Might need to bring that slightly further towards the centre of the ring, like so. When I think that that looks good, I'll pop that little set of pliers back in and then draw the wire all the way over the surface. Now the ideal at this point is to repeat on the far side. It makes it slightly trickier to see. So what I'm going to do is just lift this tail of wire up a little bit so that you're able to see more clearly. So again, we're using step number 5 for that first stage. So we're just going to rotate those pliers around. You just need to manoeuvre them so that you don't whack the wire on the other side, and start rotating that around until it sits on that curve over the top. Probably 20% of that entire circle, maybe 25%, is taken up with the design on the head of the ring. So let's pop that number 5 step back into position. and draw the wire all the way across so that it starts going over the surface at the centre of the ring like so. Now I think that might just be too far apart, ever so slightly too far apart. So it's very, very easy to move that along a bit. I'm going to ensure that the correct step is in, rotate that around a bit, and then just draw the wire back slightly. So we're looking to have a sense of symmetry, albeit we're not mirroring, we're diagonally mirroring. So that looks pretty decently centralised to me. Now in terms of options of how you can change this design up, let's just pop this down for a second. You can change this design up in many, many ways. You can go for many more of these little pear shapes going away in each direction, cascading downwards in size so they get a little bit smaller each time. And instead of a pear shape at the end, as we have here, you can create a spiral on the end instead. I happen to prefer it with the pear shape, but you want to take this design and make it your own. That is another option of how you can make this your own design. So we started with number 5. I think I'd like to use number 3 next so that you can see a distinct step down in the size. So I'm just going to draw that wire back over the surface of the ring for a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just slide number 4 inside that number 5 sized loop, and I'm going to draw the wire back around step number 4 and draw the tail back so that it hits over the surface over the top of the preceding loop. Now if we leave that flat for the time being, there are a couple of different ways that we can get that curvature in later on. So again, as we've just done on the one side, so above, so below, we need to do the exact same thing in the opposite direction. I'm just applying a little bit of heat here to make sure that that sits nicely where I desire it to. And again, I'm going to put the slightly larger size, the number 4, in to utilise the number 3 size to bring that tail of wire all the way around over the top and to get it to hit the preceding pear shape. So you can see at the moment that things are matching up equal and opposite. You may feel more comfortable with this design creating in a slightly lighter wire, a 1mm 18 gauge or even a 0.8mm 20 gauge, just to get a feel for how those loopy shapes flow together. So there's a really good reason to have that practice, because nothing is ever thrown away, nothing is ever wasted. It's always good to get a handle for how a design will work and then take that up to the slightly heavier wire. You can even take this up to a 1.5mm 14 gauge wire, which is so lovely to wear, just a little bit more challenging to get those shapes flowing if you've not worked with wire before. So have a practice and then move on to that heavier wire. With my 6-step bell making pliers, I'm graduating down through the sizes because I think it gives a really lovely aesthetic, and as I said before, it does kind of remind me of a swan on the water. So we're going to move on now to step number 2 on my lovely bell making pliers. Everything is still quite flat on the head of the ring for now, and I'll show you a couple of different ways that you can shape that up in just a moment. So again, I'm going to put the smaller section through the preceding loop, and we're going to use step number 2 just to bring that wire up and over the top. And then if I bring that back down, and I'll just show you that like so, we're graduating down to another slightly smaller size. Now if once you've created that you don't think that that has tapered down enough, what you can do is just put a little bit of warmth and heat into that pear-shaped loop, open that out slightly, and I'll just show you now what it takes to make that number 1 instead. So let's put number 1 in there and draw the wire around. I think I actually prefer that with number 1. So if we add the same design decal over here, you can rotate that around like so until that sits in the symmetrically opposite position. So let's just have a look at that. I think that's starting to get to where I want it to. I definitely prefer the number 1 size gap in those 2 last pear shapes. Now you could give yourself a little bit of extra space here, open that shape up and turn it into a coil, but I like the completed look. Now I'm about to trim away a good inch on either end of this wire, but I'm really glad that I started with more than I needed. So if we just take that really close to the preceding pass of wire. I will still have enough wire here to make a charm or something similar. There's never anything that goes in the scrap pot permanently. It will either get melted or I will make it into something else. Let's just take that slightly further over the top of the ring, and then again I'm going to line those flush cutters up, give that a bit of a snip, and there we are. So we do need our chain nose pliers now, just to make sure that all of these wires sit where we want them to. So the idea is that we don't have any gaps between the swooshes of wire. So what I want to do is just tighten those up. It's quite easy to do that just with a very simple pinch. Push that down so that it sits snugly next to that split shank in the middle of the ring there. So you can give that a squish to bring it over and then slightly bend it down. Give that a squish, and also make sure that that very last section of wire is a nice flush cut and that the cut end sits firmly against that preceding swoosh of wire. So the first thing I'm going to do is give that a really hearty squish and a squeeze with my standard flat facing chain nose pliers. What I'm doing here is setting each of those curves so that they remain in that formation. And actually the noise that you make really helps. It really does kind of add some strength to that design. Over the next 24 hours or so, as the wire starts to cool down completely, that will settle a little bit firmer than when you started, especially if you warm that through a good 4 or 5 times before you commence the project. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to get curvature so that it fits snugly over the front curve of that finger. If you're lucky enough to have some ring bending pliers, these are very elderly indeed, then they can be an absolute boon to help you here. What I'm going to do is just squish carefully, making sure that my pliers remain in the correct orientation. I'm just going to om-nom munch all the way along that 1/2, and you can see that very, very quickly you get that doming effect. Now you will probably need to just moderate how that sits, but that's the fastest possible way you can get that to fit form. If you don't have ring bending pliers, and not everybody does, you can use your ring stick or mandrel. This is the one that I use for the more physical aspects. I use it to create the wire shank of rings. I also use it and abuse it with a hammer. If you have one that's very pretty that you use to size up your rings, maybe don't whack that one with a hammer. So you can see how we use the ring bending pliers on this side, and it fits very, very nicely around the ring shank. Around the mandrel. If you don't have access to that but you do have a hammer, what you can do is support the design like so. And you can see that just doing one side at a time, you will be able to change the form. What we want to be careful of here is that we don't allow the ring to move too far off from the size you want the design to end up. So I'm going to now support the other side. And then just very gently tap that around until you get the same sort of curvature. Obviously being careful of your fingers. If you don't have access to a round form that you want to hammer, you can still make minor alterations by using your flat facing chain nose pliers, just very, very gently in this kind of form, to almost fold the wire very, very cautiously, small amounts at a time, and that will enable you to achieve the same kind of effect. Let's just pop all of these on, because why wouldn't I want 3 of them instead of just the 1? Well, I hope that you've enjoyed that really, really easy how to make your own easy wire squiggle ring tutorial, and I look forward to seeing you back here on the Gemhawks YouTube channel very, very soon. Bye for now.